Banishers Ghost of New Eden is a fantastic narrative-driven game, and I say this with all of my heart because that really is the most memorable part of the game. Pretty much every other aspect of the game fell short. However, this isn't to say that I didn't enjoy playing the game. I very much did enjoy playing Banishers Ghost of New Eden, but from a critical point of view, this game really does need some work. Let's start by talking about the story of Banishers Ghost of New Eden. This was by far the best part of the game. You play as Red and Antea, who are Banishers. Banishers are tasked to help others deal with their supernatural ghosts.
I'm a banisher, you know. I could help you, both of you. That's what I do.
But it's not just going and killing those ghosts. Rather, you are investigating the case to actually understand what happened between the ghost and the person involved. At the start of the game, you head to New Eden Town, a town plagued by a curse. You are tasked to stop the curse and figure out how the curse started in the first place. During this process, your love interest Antea dies and becomes a ghost. You find out that you can bring her back to life if you choose to. So now you are tasked with dealing with the death of your lover, as well as figuring out what happened in New Eden Town. Now, I won't spoil much more than this, but the process of finding out new information on the case of New Eden was genuinely very, very fun. As you explore New Eden and meet new people, you are constantly finding out information that can help you understand why the curse of New Eden happened in the first place. It really is a joy to unravel that information, figure out people's motives, and figure out what great tragedy could have caused such a great curse. And this excitement continues not just through the main quest, but also through the side quests.
Ah! Back, you monster!
Oof. Hell's balls, lady.
I didn't finish every side quest, and we'll get to why I didn't later, but the side quests I did do, I genuinely enjoyed. Each of the storylines were interesting, with some of them even tying back into the main story. The story is by far the best part of this game, and I really would do it no justice if I didn't mention the voice acting and the writing. The voice acting is done so well, and it really helps you feel connected to those characters.
She who rescued you, tended you for days on end. Weeks, maybe.
Week? Oh, God. What have I done?
Get your strength back before you beat yourself up.
She's dead.
Yes. That's why you're here. And why I was sent to look after you.
And the writing is also done excellently, if you can get past many of the historical inaccuracies. Now, on top of this, throughout the story, you're faced with many complex decisions. Each of the cases that you tackle throughout the game have very gray area conclusions. At the end of the case, you have to decide between three decisions. You can blame a person, which is taking their life force from them. You can banish the ghost, which is essentially sending that ghost to hell, from my understanding. Or you can ascend the ghost, which is sending that ghost off happily or sending them to heaven. Again, this is what my understanding of it was. I found myself genuinely struggling with many of these decisions because of how gray the cases were. There was very rarely a case that was black and white in terms of like who caused the issue or who is to like blame. This was the biggest appeal of the game to me. A story that is filled with interesting characters, plots, and decisions. And Don't Nod, the developers of the game, really did succeed in this aspect. Overall, the story was amazing, and I would have completed more of the game and more of the side quests if I wasn't just bored of the gameplay loop. The gameplay loop was okay. It wasn't anything spectacular, but it wasn't anything atrocious either. Now, for some context, I like a challenge in my games, so I ended up playing on the hardest difficulty for the majority of the game. And I gotta say, this did make me enjoy the combat and the gameplay just a little bit more. This is because the difficulty scaling was so intense that sometimes I'd be getting 1 or 2 shots. Now, this forced me to really slow down my combat experience and really be smart about the decisions I was making during combat. Like, should I approach this combat with ranged abilities? Maybe with Antea's abilities? Maybe go in close with Red? Or maybe I should even try to parry? This made the combat feel like I was solving a puzzle, but that wasn't enough to actually save the combat. See, the combat at the start of the game wasn't the best, but over time, it did get better because you unlocked more abilities. The problem is the core fundamentals of the combat already was just clunky. It doesn't feel very smooth. The lock-on system was pretty clunky. It often, you'd try to switch and it wouldn't, or it'd switch to the wrong person. The dodges felt really like clunky, especially with the camera. You dodge and the camera wouldn't like track where you think it would. And the transitions between some of your abilities felt really clunky as well. Clunky is the best way I could describe it. And on top of this, at the start of the game, you don't have nearly as many tools available as you do in the end game. Now, I think the combat, it really started to feel better as the game went on because you unlocked more abilities. And the combat, when you actually had all of those abilities, was way more fun. This is because, again, with the difficulty, I really had to be careful about what abilities I felt were best in the specific situation that I was in. Because if I went in with no caution or no plan, I'd just go in and get one shot and die. So this did add some slight enjoyment to the combat, but at the end of the day, the combat fundamentals just weren't the best. And I gotta say, this was by far the most disappointing area of the game for me. But with this said, there is a decent amount of build variety, which I genuinely did enjoy. I went for a build focusing on Antea, and this was because when you get hit with Antea, you don't actually take damage, it just takes away from the spirit meter bar. And this was really great because when I'm playing on the hardest difficulty, I could actually make a couple of mistakes and not just immediately die. Now, I also saw some other builds based around Red's kit, some builds based around Red's gun, and even builds built around the perfect switching system. Now, actual build crafting, it is really fun. It doesn't have a ton of options, but it has enough to be engaging. On top of this, all the gear that you can get, you can really mix and match the gears that you want to really emphasize the build that you're going on, as well as pairing that with skill trees and abilities that you could unlock. Those two things combined can really make you have some really fun builds. That was a genuinely fun part of the game. Once you got a build going, the game felt much better. But again, that doesn't fix the fact that the core combat fundamentals just felt clunky. So, but what about the gameplay for the quest? The gameplay for the quest was also pretty boring. I hate to say it. It was enough to keep my attention and get me through the game, but it wasn't enough to make me scream about how exciting it was. Most of the gameplay for the quest consisted of you just kind of going to an area, interacting with an object, maybe you fight some enemies, and then you repeat until you get to the conclusion of the quest. Now, there was a system in the game called rituals. There was essentially different rituals that would perform different actions. Sometimes it would make like a ghost appear, so you could talk to the ghost to learn more. Sometimes you'd spawn a high-level enemy called a scourge. The ritual system, it had a couple of different uses, but I think that they could have done so much more with the system. Because if you input a wrong ritual, nothing happens. You just lose the resource you used to actually do that ritual. Like, how awesome would it have been if you put the wrong input in, but it still happened? Maybe the game wanted you to listen to like an echo, a memory of the past, but instead you summoned the ghost, and the ghost didn't like it and it didn't want to be summoned, and so it started to fight you. How cool would that have been? The ritual system wasn't bad. It was enough to carry the story on. It did what its job was supposed to do, but I really think that there was missed potential for what could have been. Now, in general, the quest gameplay loop wasn't the best, but at the end of the day, it did what it was supposed to do. It carried the story onward. I came for a good story, and that is what kept me engaged, even if the gameplay systems weren't the most fun. They weren't the worst I've seen, but it wasn't anything amazing either. Finally, the exploration of the game I hate to say it, but it also kind of felt lackluster. I really had no incentive to explore the world around me. Every time I did go off the beaten path to explore, I found some loot, but it wasn't enough to make me want to go and explore more. There were some of these like combat challenges that you could do that if you completed them, it increased every one of your abilities, like your stat points. But because the combat just wasn't the best, it wasn't enough to make me like want to go out of my way to go and search for those things. Why would I spend the time exploring this world when you don't really get rewarded for it much? And you probably am going to have to sit through many combat scenarios with a really middle of the road combat system. So I mainly just followed the quest tracker and ran through the levels. Now, the one thing I will say about the world as a whole is it was a very, very beautiful world.
Look at that.
It's beautiful.
No. Look at it.
There were times where I was like, man, what a great looking game. So, you know, gotta give the credit where the credit is due. The game looked amazing, very gorgeous visuals, but in terms of how engaging it is to actually go around and explore the world, I felt like it was lackluster and it could have been better. I'm being pretty harsh on the game, but I want it to be clear that I did enjoy the game. I came into the game looking for a great story, and that is what I got delivered. The systems surrounding the story, it might not be the greatest, but they also weren't the worst. I had moments of gameplay that I genuinely enjoyed, but for the most part, the thing that kept me playing was the story. And if you want a game that tells a good story, I really would suggest this game to you. The game was marketed as a narrative-driven game, and the developers really did deliver on that. So should you buy Banishers Ghost of New Eden? If you're looking for a great story to get engaged with, and you're not worried about the gameplay surrounding that story being middle of the road, then I'd say you should definitely buy this game. If I were to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the game that it was supposed to be, I'd say it's a 7 at best.